Um, when Adam gave me the invitation to share a transformative moment in my choice to pursue a life of faith and justice, I kind of struggled because there are so many individuals and so many collectives who have shaped me into the justice seeker that I am today. So I'm going to get very, very specific tonight, but please understand that there are literally dozens of other stories I could tell of dozens of other people and situations that have continued to contribute to my continuing transformation. But tonight, especially in this moment when our immigrant neighbors are ever more in danger of being dehumanized and detained and deported and killed, as we have a wannabe despot in power who is literally posting AI-generated images of himself alongside the phrase, I love the smell of deportations in the morning. I want to tell you the story of the first time that I watched someone be killed by the words of empire, followed by the first time I participated in that person's actual resurrection. I serve as the senior minister at Judson Church, as Adam told you, which was founded to serve immigrants in New York City. And I have dedicated my pastoral life to accompanying immigrants to their ICE check-ins and court hearings. But I was born into enough privilege that it actually took me a while to fully understand the difference between caring about justice theoretically in what Bonhoeffer might call a cheap way and actually embodying it as an actually costly calling. And there was a specific moment when this work transformed from simply being something I did to being something I live. There was a moment when I stopped thinking of the word sanctuary as the name for a physical room and realized that sanctuary is actually a state of mind that I need to choose every day. And this transformation is all because of a friend named Cassandra. So I'm going to testify to Cassandra tonight. And I met Cassandra in 2019. When I was working as a faith leader coordinator for immigrant accompaniment, and Cassandra was seeking accompaniment to an upcoming ICE check-in. She'd been living and working in the United States since 2015 when she had arrived on a boat seeking asylum from her native Haiti. And despite doing everything right following her arrival, working as a home health aide, paying taxes, showing up for every ICE check-in, filing every bit of paperwork, Cassandra was being told that because she had arrived the way she had, she was now in danger of deportation. So with that threat looming, my first accompaniment with Cassandra was harrowing, but it ended with a 1-month extension to allow her to file further paperwork. And we left Cassandra's first ICE check-in feeling like we had something like God on our side. And we were quickly humbled. Because when we came back a month later with more documentation in hand, with more volunteers accompanying, we had a feeling that Cassandra might be okay, that presence plus paperwork might now be enough. But that day, something strange happened. For years, our accompaniment volunteers had been allowed to sit in the waiting room with our immigrant friends, but on this day, 3 security guards announced a mysterious new policy. Arbitrariness is just the business of ICE. They announced this mysterious new policy that forbade anyone except the summoned immigrant and their lawyer from entering the waiting area. And I demanded to be let in, and then somehow the power of my clergy collar convinced them to admit me. And a typical accompaniment in those days usually lasted around an hour, but that day, this one stretched well over 4 hours, and this was for an accompaniment that Cassandra had arrived 30 minutes early for. And so at last, Cassandra's name was called. We stood together, walked to the door, and an ICE agent stopped me and asked, "Who are you?" And I answered, "I'm Cassandra's minister." And he snorted and he shoved me out of the threshold, pulled Cassandra inside, and slammed the door in my face. It was the first time that that had ever happened. And we now know in this current administration, that's happening all the time. But back then, that was a shock. And so I stood there and then I sat and I waited and I waited. And finally, the agent reappeared and said flatly, "She's being moved. You'll hear from her later." And I asked if he could tell me something now. And his smirk widened into a cold smile, and he said, listen, I know all you bleeding hearts. I know you care for these people, but this isn't the old administration. We're moving Haitians as quickly as they can get here. It's the new regime. Your accompaniment doesn't matter anymore. And I want you to take that in, because I'm going to come back to that phrase later. Your accompaniment doesn't matter anymore. And I begged him to let me say goodbye. And I begged and I begged, and he finally agreed to let me in. But minutes ticked by until a door opened, and I was led into a tiny room where Cassandra was literally shaking in the corner. And I was told that I could hug her. She pleaded silently with her eyes, and in the middle of our embrace, a new officer who I'd never met before slithered into the room and announced, all right, you got to stop this. We got to move the body. And in that instance, I saw and I heard someone kill someone else with 5 words. To them, Cassandra was no longer a person. She was now a body that had to be moved. They had killed her in their own minds. And in their minds, our accompaniment didn't matter anymore. And then my little bubble of myopic privilege popped, and the scales fell from the eyes of my heart. But here's where the story took a turn. Even though the ruling on that day was for Cassandra's immediate deportation, through some administrative mess, which ICE also is in the business of, Cassandra sat in the Bergen County Jail for 4 months, further dehumanization, but not deportation. And at the start of the 5th month of deportation, Cassandra was granted a hearing. And so our accompaniment network gathered 25 people and filled the courtroom for her hearing. And the hearing rushed by in a blur, and a bond was set, to our surprise, to spring Cassandra from her 4-month detention, and a new court date was given to allow her to gather evidence for her asylum claim. And then something mystical happened. At the end of her statement, the judge looked out at all of us, the 25 people who were gathered there, and smiled. But it wasn't the cold smile that ICE agent had given me. It was a genuine, loving smile. And then she leaned forward into the microphone where she records her ruling. And she said, let it be known that there are 25 members of Cassandra's church here with her, which shows that she is connected to and contributes to a large, loving community. And that had never happened before at a court hearing. And the very next day, I carried a check to 26 Federal Plaza. I waited 3 hours as word was sent to New Jersey, and Cassandra was then released from her cell. And a few months later, she was granted asylum. And from that moment on, she became one of the most stalwart accompaniment volunteers that we have ever had. And our accompaniment mattered. No matter what that ICE agent or those ICE agents back in those days said to us, our accompaniment mattered. So now, 6 years later, as so many more of our immigrant neighbors are in ever-growing danger, as I witness so many more fierce and enraged people come together in large, loving communities to surround our immigrant neighbors and demand that they be treated like the beloved human beings that they are, I find myself reflecting on who I was before I met Cassandra and who I am now. Because there was a time when my privilege protected me from having to understand the true meaning of solidarity and sanctuary. But then I saw the disappearance and death that empire is capable of when it thinks accompaniment doesn't matter. And then I saw what resurrection is actually possible when accompaniment refuses to let empire have the final word. So by some cosmic accident, I was born with a certain amount of privilege. And I now wholeheartedly believe, much to Trey's point, that my privilege is worth absolutely nothing. My privilege is worth absolutely nothing unless I am spending it embodying sanctuary for those who are most endangered by the violence of empire right now, today, every moment of every day. And when I read tonight's passage from Luke and I hear Jesus say, therefore none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions, folks, I know that Jesus is talking directly to me. I feel read to filth by Jesus. Jesus is talking directly to my privilege, directly to my heart that must always find ever expanding ways to give up how I hold on to, how I clutch and cling to my own privilege, and nudge me to choose to embody sanctuary and solidarity instead. Empire desperately wants us to believe that our accompaniment doesn't matter because empire is so desperately scared that we will figure out that our accompaniment actually does matter. As I witness the current uprisings of folks using their privilege to resurrect the humanity of those that empire is actively trying to disappear, it shows me that empire will never have the final word. And now every Sunday, as I benedict my congregation at Judson, I always end by saying, as you leave this sanctuary, remember to be a sanctuary wherever you go. And that is how I liberate myself from my own myopic privilege. And it's a practice I have to choose to embody every day. You don't have to be in a sanctuary to be a sanctuary. Our accompaniment matters. That's what empire is so scared of. So thank you, Kairos folks, for showing me the truth that accompaniment matters every day. Thanks so much.